It's not uncommon for an athlete to need 3,000, 7,000 calories, and a lot of people don't know about that. A lot of athletes don't know about that.
Welcome back to the Talk at Elevation. Today we're joined by Niki Thomson, whose background in psychology and neuroscience brings a unique perspective to the connection between sports, nutrition, and mental health. Niki, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So how did your psychology and neuroscience background kind of shape your approach to nutrition and mental health?
Yeah, so I originally went to Penn State for psychology, the neuroscience option. I did switch out of it and I completed my master's in sports nutrition later on, but I still like to utilize a lot of the information that I learned from all of those valuable classes, and how it shaped my approach with nutrition and mental health is that it allows me to hold more compassionate space for my own self, which then I reflect on my clients, for them to feel more understood and be understood. That's really helpful when it comes to counseling and creating a non-judgmental space where people can open up about their experiences. And then it also helps with realistic application when it comes to behavioral change. I always tell my clients, I could make you the perfect meal plan. I could calculate all your macros and micros, but it comes down to, can we actually implement those actions and then reap the benefits of those actions? And so knowing about psychology and how to make the brain, or how to work with the brain instead of going against it, can be really helpful for those areas.
Absolutely.
Well said.
Yeah. Just mental side of things with food. Why do athletes have such a complicated relationship with nutrition?
Yes, most definitely. So athletes are at an increased risk of developing disordered eating disorders. And I would say there's a handful of reasons, as well as there's a decent amount of research on it too. So one of the biggies is that athletes tend to be higher on the perfectionism personality scale, and that's going to be a risk factor for the development of a complication relationship with food, body movement. The other one would be, I would say, athletes are considered a different population. Therefore, they have different guidelines for nutrition, as well as they have different goals. One of the goals with athletes is we want to be mindful of their sports performance, along with general health and any other goals that they have. But then in addition, I would say, and this is where the psychology really comes into play, is identity. Identity is huge when it comes to our mental health. And a lot of people who play sports and all of that, they identify as an athlete. That's a very valuable, deep-rooted place that they find self-worth. And so because of that, athletes will then see their body, will have a higher focus on their body due to its ability to perform at a certain sport that they put a lot of self-worth in and confidence and value in. But then also athletes have a higher risk of having a complicated relationship with food, body, movement, because especially if they're in sports where there's a lot of skin showing. So think about gymnastics, women's volleyball, but then also if it's a sport where weight and appearance is really looked at, like wrestling, crew, I'm trying to think, dance, gymnastics. So that's why it can be a little bit more difficult for athletes.
So when those athletes are trying to find their identity, what are those things along with that like prevents them from being seen necessarily? In the athlete world, things like that.
Can you expand a little bit more on the question?
Yes. So our whole thing at Fan Nation is that everyone deserves to be seen. So when it comes to food and nutrition, what is, along with those things, that affects them, being seen and reaching that max thing?
I think it can be really hard on athletes where they can sometimes chase a certain symbolism of, they want to feel a sense of belonging. And if you're in an athletic environment, being a really good team player, being the MVP can create that sense of belonging and safety. And so that can be really hard on them when we want to find more internal ways to find sense of belonging as well as safety. But then some other ones, when it comes to identity, it just, there's a lot of self-worth in being able to perform well in a sport, especially if that's your world. Self-worth and confidence and all of that. And so to be more seen, I would say, one, people it would really benefit people if they learned more about how different athletes really are when it comes to their nutrition. I've taken care of some Olympian athletes, and they need like it's not uncommon for an athlete to need 3,000, 7,000 calories, and a lot of people don't know about that. A lot of athletes don't know about that either.
Before we move on, let's talk about something every serious athlete needs to pay attention to: your digital footprint. Fan-Day Nation has just released a powerful new tool to help athletes make sure their social media profiles are fully optimized and recruit ready. Today, coaches aren't just evaluating game film, they're evaluating character, leadership, and maturity online. This resource gives you a step-by-step roadmap to clean up your profiles, highlight your strengths, and avoid common mistakes that can cost opportunities. If playing at the next level is your goal, don't leave your online presence to chance. Go check it out now at fandaynation.com.
Sure. Yeah, people are completely different the second you play a sport versus, just everyday life.
Yeah. How does that change, like, from going to an athlete and then suddenly you're not an athlete anymore and now you have to change your whole diet and nutrition?
Yes, that's a great question. Because that's one, there's a lot of grief in changing identity. And a lot of collegiate athletes, especially let's say football players who need a lot of energy in comparison to some other sports, it is really hard. I would advocate and say that every athlete should go through therapy with life transitions, because something that I commonly hear from my athletes is that they were able to eat whatever they wanted or anything that they wanted in college, but then nobody taught them how to eat like a non-athlete once they transition out of college and maybe they're not doing that sport as much anymore.
Do you see that a lot? Do you see a lot of athletes, going into that and then getting super out of shape? And then how do you bring them back to that?
That's a great question. Yeah, I do see it a lot. I do see it a lot, especially with mothers who now have kiddos, and I do think mothers could use more support in many areas. And how I bring it back is one, just validating that experience. And that's where, again, the psychology comes into play of understanding that their needs were very, very different. And now they're in a different environment. They're in a different setting where, again, they're not doing practice maybe every day or 2 to 3 times a week anymore. And especially with mothers, now their bodies are going through different changes. And that's hard in itself. And so giving them understanding around that, but as well as what's it called? Validation to let me reword it. Giving them the space to grieve all of that in an understanding place. That they're no longer this athlete who's working out, let's say, every single day of the week with strength and conditioning coaches. They transitioned into maybe more of a sedentary work life. So really appealing to those emotions first before diving into, okay, what can we do next now moving forward and being action oriented?
Yeah, that's a perfect way to say it. Like, how do you change? Like, I know I eat way less than I did in high school and college just by being so active, and now I'm like not as much anymore. So it's a big change for sure.
What are some of those biggest hurdles that people suffer getting over that hill and finally getting into nutrition and getting into like the flow of it?
I think a lot of people, especially athletes, with oftentimes being higher in that perfectionism trait, I think giving themselves more grace, as well as athletes, their bodies can look in many different shapes and forms. And that's another thing that a lot of people aren't the most aware of, even some athletes too, is it's oftentimes thought that the lower the body fat, the better that person is going to perform, which can also then lead to eating disorders or disordered eating. And so I would recommend having a little bit more grace, as well as having the conversation of your body's absolutely amazing. It's so sensitive, but it's also so resilient. And it did its due diligence when you were an athlete. And now we're just in a different chapter of our lives, and helping them transition and accept that new chapter is something that I really like to work on with my clients.
Yeah. That's awesome. So let's pivot a little bit. What made you pivot again, from neuroscience into nutrition and coaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. So originally when I was a psychology major, and again, still very passionate about it, I, at the time, was not the best with emotional boundaries. I mean, I was like 18, 19 years old.
That's hard.
I wanted to, like save everybody and solve depression and all of that. And then I learned it was a lot more complicated. But I actually, I wish sometimes wish I stayed with psychology. I wasn't aware of the branch of sports psychology. Um, and so when I left the field, I still wanted to help people reach, it's called self-actualization. It's part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs of becoming basically the best version of yourself. And there's all these different moving pieces when becoming the best version of yourself. And some of the foundational ones, according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is having security with food. And then that then plays a role with then being able to create good relationships with yourself and others. And so that was a safer way for me to help people become the best version of themselves, was how can I make them feel comfortable in their body? How can I make sure that they're eating in a compassionate balance, as well as, against, I still get to help with the mental side a bit, but there was a little bit more protection when it came to my emotional boundaries. But now as I've gotten older, I've gotten better at that too. But that's why I pivoted to sports nutrition, because it still included all of my passions of the mental health, the fitness, but then also the nutrition.
That's really cool.
Niki, how have you personally had a relationship with food? Like, has it been hard to get that movement in, and having failure, and how does that change over time?
Yes. So I would say a lot of people who get into this space, they all start out with a similar-ish journey of they want to become a healthier individual. They might start going to the gym. And so that was my experience too. I was a very health-oriented person when I was younger. I wanted to do the right thing. And so I wanted to put the right foods in my body. And then I've been playing sports since kindergarten, consistently too. So that was a big part of my life. But then as I got more education, with psychology, but also then getting my master's in sports nutrition, that really changed my relationship with food, body, and movement. Because now with more science information, it's helped my relationship become a lot more flexible with food, body, and movement. I'm more confident and well-informed with my decisions. Therefore, I'm not as fearful of oh, is this food okay for me or is it not okay for me? It really helped with creating more gray space rather than having a binary thinking with, is this food good or bad? Which food is on a spectrum and it all comes down to a balance, but it's complicated because every nutrient has its own balance. And then when it comes to failure, I would say it really depends on how you define failure. I think a lot of people see failure as they did not get their desired outcome. When personally I see failure as not giving a genuine attempt towards wanting a certain outcome. I think if you take the scientific method approach, if you don't get your desired outcome when you try to go get it, that's still a lot of data of, okay, that approach didn't work. You're not a failure if it doesn't work. You just now have more information on what to do next. So failure actually never has really been too much of an issue for me, but I do see, a lot of people struggle with it. And I think reframing their mindset to just try to do a genuine attempt and be proud of your efforts. And you can worry about the disappointment later on if you don't get what you want.
We're proud to celebrate women who lead on and off the court. Nico Stones welcomes new brand ambassador Sophie Zadell, a standout basketball player at the University of Colorado. Her exclusive edits is all about confidence, strength, and the style that moves with you. Support women in sports and shop Sophie's limited collection now at nicostones.com.
Yeah. How do you deal with different clients who go through different things and trying to teach them all these different ways? Because not everyone's going to listen to this aspect of food, or their brain's not going to work that way. So how do you balance teaching those clients different methods of nutrition?
Yeah, that's a great question. I like to take the approach of learning a lot about their knowledge. And so oftentimes I ask what occupation they do or what hobbies they have, because I can make a lot of analogies about nutrition to what they already know. So for example, I've worked with a handful of construction workers, and then I talk about having a toolbox. and we talk a lot about the balance around food. And I say, hey, like having a hammer is a great tool to have, but if you have only hammers in your toolbox, that toolbox probably is not a very well-rounded hammer, or sorry, toolbox, my apologies. But then also it matters like what is your goal? It really matters what your goal is, if it's like weight loss, weight gain, maintenance, general health, sports performance, preventing diabetes. It all matters on like what is the environment we're in, what is the goal, because that also is going to change my approach with the individual. So, yeah.
What age does it start becoming like crucial and so important to be following these guidelines?
That is a fantastic question. I'm sure there is science on it, but I don't know it off of the top of my head. But I would say from like personal experience, a lot of this is developing in childhood. As kids, we really look at our caregivers when it comes to direction, and so that's where I've seen a lot of complications with the development of relationship with food, body, and movement, is seeing what their caregivers did, seeing how their caregivers reflected and or projected their own relationship with food, body, and movement. So I would say it really starts there, as well as something that I learned in my life cycle classes is just like seeing a trusted parent or caregiver eat a bunch of vegetables. That in itself helps increase the likelihood that their child is going to eat vegetables and not be scared of what that bell pepper looks weird. Like, what is that? Seeing somebody that you trust do these things, or seeing somebody that you admire eat a diverse diet and have a good relationship with their food, body, and movement is a really good foundation for the other person, especially kids. So again, I would say at a young age, but I don't know the exact age range.
I've got a cool quick question for you, Nikki. So how do you feel about the school's nutrition and stuff? You know, once Obama came in, or sorry, it was Michelle actually that made all the food groups and stuff. Everything went to whole grains and everything. How do you think that the system is working and what's not working?
As of recently, or
Yeah, as of like right
Or
now.
just in general,
Yeah.
the school system food, the food menu there.
Yeah.
that's a really good question. I don't know as much about politics as well as school law in America when it comes to like cafeteria regulations, because there are regulations. Um, I definitely believe that we can pour more funds and care into it 100%. And I really do believe that we should be learning more about nutrition around middle school and high school too. I think that should be a priority for healthcare, or not healthcare, for health classes. But the other thing that's really, really important is having somebody speak on it who's knowledgeable in nutrition, because I've had teachers in the past say certain things about food that now, having my master's in nutrition, was like completely incorrect. So that would be really important, especially because one of the biggest populations for eating disorders is adolescent females. And so think about it, you know, it was all quite hard for us.
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, it's hard.
That's where I saw a lot of eating disorders really start stemming, actually since fifth grade. That I think if we implemented more evidence-based nutrition in middle school, that would be a fantastic introduction. As well as when it comes to the cafeteria food, it definitely could highly improve. But I think it's also difficult because a lot of these employees that work for school cafeterias, they are not getting paid very well. There's just not good funding in it. But yeah, those would be my thoughts on
That's a
it.
great response. I
Awesome.
was really curious actually. So.
Yeah. One last question for you. What advice would you give to just people in general, athletes who are struggling with perfection, fear, or failure?
Yeah. I would say, again, defining what failure means to them and reframing it possibly. Again, I would argue most people see failure as they didn't get their desired outcome. And if that's their definition of failure, it's going to be pretty difficult to navigate through life. That again, I think reframing it where, did you give a genuine attempt? Are you proud of your efforts? And if you didn't get your desired outcome, you're still getting a lot of data of, okay, that approach didn't work. How can we now change it and maybe try again? And then When it comes to the perfectionism, that's where I would ask that person, like, what are they symbolically chasing? Why do you want to feel perfect? Where is that stemming from? And oftentimes people with perfectionism, it's because it gave them a lot of sense of safety.
Mhm.
And so if they're in a safe environment now, teaching them that, hey, you did a great job at surviving whatever that environment was in the past. Obviously, you're a huge overachiever. You've done great work, but it's also weighing on you a lot. And now that you're in a safe environment, how can we loosen up on the perfectionism and make more room for being compassionate towards yourself? That's what I would tell athletes, because a lot of them are oftentimes chasing either symbolism or an external or extrinsic motivator. And that's never going to, not never, how do I want to word this? Prioritizing extrinsic motivators oftentimes is going to lead to a lot of emptiness. So I would really want to work with them of how can we make this a more internal, fulfilling journey for you rather than chasing the next goal.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, Niki, where can we find you? Be Better Nutrition, things like that. Where can we find you? Instagram, all that.
Yeah, I have a professional Instagram account called Niki _the _RD. So NIKI_the_RD. So I sometimes share some content. It's a lot of volleyball content nowadays, but I also share some tidbits about nutrition too and testimonies.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Niki. It was great getting to hear. That's a lot of good stuff that I personally want to take into my life.
Right? Same here.
Thank you for creating the space for this.
Yes, of course.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll see you next time. And thank you guys for coming to the Talk at Elevation. We'll see you later.
Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.
Thank you.
Bye,
Have a good
Niki.
one.